When you create an illusion knit, it's inevitable that you will have areas where one colour predominantly comes to the front and the other colour pulls back. To achieve this, you will have garter stitch ridges in one of your colours interspersed with stocking stitch or stockinette ridges in your other colour. Unfortunately, this use of consecutive garter stitch and stockinette ridges tends to make the work curl up. For this reason, and because the ridge ends often look a little untidy, illusion knits require a border of some kind. You may need to decide before the piece is begun what the completed piece is to be used for, and this choice of use will determine the kind of border you want. If you want the edge at the start of the piece to look the same as the cast-off edge at the end of the piece, then you may wish to start with a temporary cast-on. You could then cast off your first side when you have completed the illusion and its border along that side, then unpick the temporary cast-on, knit the border as you did for the one you have completed, and then cast off so that these two borders mirror each other. So here's the temporary cast-on that I tend to use. It's like crocheting a chain around my needle. Put a slip knot in the yarn and place it over the hook. Take the live yarn around the back of the needle and pull it through the loop on the hook. Continue in this way, building up a chain of stitches on the needle. Put in your stitch markers every 10 or 20 stitches if you wish. And when you have enough stitches on the needle, cut off the yarn and tie it off. I can now knit into my temporary cast-on as I would normally do. When I reach the stitch markers, I'm just going to transfer them from one needle to the other. But I'm going to now be using my chart. Now, because with illusion knitting, every right side row is knit, I'm only going to need the chart for the wrong side row. So that was the temporary cast on and the start of the knitting. The chart here, though, shows the end of the knitting. This is the end of the illusion knit chart. So I've done my knitting of the illusion and I'm ready to start thinking about the border at the far end. Here's the final ridge of the illusion, ready to start knitting the border. And here is the start of the work where I knitted into the temporary cast on. I'm going to knit the border in my light colour, so I'll just cut off the dark. Starting to knit the border then in my light colour. When I reach the stitch markers, I can just take them out. I'm not going to need them anymore. And then when I reach the end of the row, I need to knit twice into that last stitch to create a mitered corner. So I'm increasing in the last stitch of each row. Continuing then the next row. And again in the last stitch, if I want a 45-degree corner, a mitered corner, I increase into that last stitch in the row. Here's the mitered corner then starting to take effect. There's the 45-degree angle. I quite fancy, for a bit of interest, I quite fancy putting a dark ridge into the border. So I'll knit across and back in the dark colour. But I've got to be very careful that I pick up on the right side of the work to put the dark in, because there's a very definite difference on the wrong side. I can see where I picked up the stitches on the wrong side, or I knitted the new colour in, and it's very different to the right side. So that's enough of a dark ridge in there. I want to go back to the light colour to knit one final ridge of this border in that light colour. I've now completed that border but this piece, when I've finished it, is going to be stretched over a board for display. Now because of that, this next ridge that I'm knitting is not going to have an increase or a decrease. It's going to take in the thickness of the board. And now I'll start knitting the facing that goes over the back of the board, and this time then when I reach the end of the row I'm going to knit the last 2 stitches together. So I'm going to decrease in those last 2 stitches, and this will create a 45-degree angle coming in at each end of the row. You can see the border and the facing now, and the facing will fold over and go around the back of the board that I anchor this piece to. So now I'm going to just cast off along that final edge using a needle that is bigger than the original, and this will give me a nice loose cast off along that edge. And I reach the end of that, still decreasing, and I'm just going to tie off that last stitch, and then I've completed that final bit of edging on that side. It's time now to undo the temporary cast on. With the wrong side of the work facing me, I need to tease out the knot at the right hand end of the work. Unfortunately, I did my temporary cast on in the dark colour and it doesn't show the stitches up that well. So let's have a look at one that's a bit brighter. Here you can see the temporary cast on in the yellow, and here's the cast off edge. Having a closer look at that, here's the right side of the work and now the wrong side. It's the wrong side I need, and here's the knot at the right hand end. I need to take this knot out, so I'm just going to loosen it a bit and then undo it. So I'll pull that bit out, and now here I can see the stitches I want to pick up. These dark green stitches here, these kind of olive green stitches. So I'm going to put the needle in the first of those stitches, and I want to pull the temporary cast on out of the way so it's not caught around the needle, and then I can just take the temporary cast on stitch out of that one, move the temporary cast on out of the way, put the needle through the next stitch that I want to pick up, just make sure it's not caught up, pull that temporary stitch out, and I just work my way along the temporary cast on in that way, taking the stitches out one at a time, picking up those olive green stitches, and then when I get to the end, just keep going right to the end and take out eventually that final stitch. And there we are, the temporary cast on has been removed, all the stitches back on the needle now. There is a bit of a problem though, because you might find that the stitches seem now to be the wrong way round to knit into. Now you could turn every stitch round as you go, or you could simply just take that into consideration and knit into the stitches I'm just going to knit a few ridges the way I would normally, because I want to have a look at how different this edge looks to the knitting that I'd been doing the other way or in the other direction. So there's a light ridge. I'll just put a dark ridge in as well. Final row of the dark ridge. And there we are. And there's not ever so much difference between the ridges I've done after I'd taken out the temporary cast on and the ridges I'd done before.